Betting on sports is for recreation and entertainment. Also, put a ball peen hammer on your desk next to you. And if you ever bet more than you're comfortable losing, just take it and hit yourself in the forehead with it, and everything will be fine.
If sports betting is not legal where you're at, call me because I probably got a guy in Chicago.
Got a guy. Welcome to the Futures Edge podcast. I'm Jim Uriel. As always, co-host and brains behind the operation, Bob Ichino. Today we have sports betting legend, Uncle Phil. Phil, before we go, tell them where they can get a hold of you on Twitter and your website.
Yeah, it's at Uncle Phil's Locks on all social media, whether it's Twitter, whether it's Instagram, whether it's TikTok. Those are all available, and certainly my website's the exact same. So that's where you get in touch with me.
What was it? Uncle Phil's Locks? Is that what it was?
Yeah, at Uncle Phil's Locks.
Gotcha.
Okay, I have to say this for my lawyers to be satisfied. Sports gambling is not for everybody. Bobby and I have been in the trading business for a long time. We personally know plenty of people who've lost their fortune betting on sports. If you have an addictive personality, steer clear. This is recreation and entertainment. It's supposed to be fun. If you lose money and you want to blow your head off, you bet too much damn money. Stop being an idiot. Phil, you agree with all that, right? That's nothing radical, is it?
Yeah, no, it's really not. But there are smart ways of doing it. And, the way I approach sports betting and sports gambling is more of sports investing. There is a smarter way of doing things. And certainly there's risk of everything. I mean, it's not diving off in the deep end of the derivatives market, but it is certainly, it certainly has some risk. All investing has risk, and this is certainly the same.
Okay, so here's my question. This college basketball, I assume, is a focus of yours, correct? As is most all sports, right?
Well, absolutely. Love college basketball. Okay. Football's been my bread and butter for a long time, but college basketball is certainly there as well.
Well, because right now, I have a question about it. We started this college basketball season. The early season rankings are getting more and more nonsense, it seems to me. The only thing I know about college basketball so far, and we've just started conference play, is that Purdue's pretty good. How do you look at games early in the season when these teams, the transfer portal has ricocheted players back and forth? You don't even really know what's going on with teams. How do you pinpoint that at the beginning of the season?
Well, it's tough. I mean, literally right now, you do certain trends on this. Like, for instance, a good tip for people that are looking at college basketball is that the first night or first day of conference season is you always look at playing underdogs. The lines are a little bit skewed because teams have played smaller teams, have bolstered their record a lot, and you're looking for teams that actually that haven't played that competition. So, for instance, we'll just take one conference, for instance, last night in the SEC. The SEC played 6 games last night, and the underdogs went 5-1. So it's and that's the opening day of conference season is always a really good target to look at playing underdogs. And then beyond that, who's going to win this year? I mean, it's tough because, injuries take so much of a toll during the season. The same thing happens in pro football that's happening right now as well. So.
Okay, so here's this. Yeah. So Notre Dame historically has traded with a premium spread because of their ravenous, ridiculously loyal fan base, correct? Are there any other consistent anomalies over time with certain teams, or is Notre Dame? And does the Notre Dame thing still exist, where they're at half a point, whatever?
It totally still exists. Like, for instance, on Friday, South Carolina is playing Notre Dame in a bowl game, and Notre Dame's favored by 2 points. I personally am taking the other side of that. I'm taking South Carolina. I mean, Notre Dame is, as you said, it's very astute. sounds like you might have placed a wager before in your life.
Couple, 2, 3.
just to clarify, make sure we're on equal footing here. But yes, Notre Dame is certainly there. You can certainly get historical teams, Dallas Cowboys, the Pittsburgh Steelers. Those are all very public teams, and certainly teams that, like Cincinnati. Cincinnati is the antithesis of that. The Cincinnati Bengals are almost always not getting enough love, and you get more value on the side of them. So there's certainly both sides of that coin.
So could a novice make a steady diet of just that, of betting against Notre Dame and betting on the Bengals every week?
100%. Cincinnati is 20-3 against the spread in their last 23 games.
Holy crap. Okay, here I have another question, Bobby. Then I want to get you in this too, because this is, as you know, this is fun for me. Now the bowl games, everything's changed in the bowl games with players with aspirations for the NFL start to sit out. Illini, everyone, clearly everyone around the country wants to talk about the Illini because Illini is obviously the number one. But anyway, three most marquee players are sitting out. How do you game plan for that going into a bowl game? Or do you just sit and watch and wait for these guys to make their decision?
Well, look, for me right now, the way I handicap games is looking at teams who've you kind of look at a couple things with bowl games. Certainly I love the Fighting Brett Bielema's, so I fully endorse the Illini there. But you look at teams that want to be there and teams that don't. And then you look at teams that have had the most portal transfers, potentially where there's been some issues, say in the locker room that, whatever is happening is not good. For instance, Florida led the University of Florida led the NCAA in portal transfers this year. So because of that, they were favored by 8.5 points versus Oregon State. And for me, I looked at it, there were some other fundamental reasons. And, to put it in your audience's vernacular, I'm more of a fundamentalist as far as the way I approach games. There's really kind of 3 ways that you look at games from a sports investing or gambling scenario. You look at it from a fundamental standpoint, where you look at matchups of certain teams and players and see which ones are actually, you see, I've been in sales all my life. So in sales, you find the point of pain and you push and you solve that pain. And that's kind of what happens in this. You find the point of pain in the way I analyze things and say, what is going to be the point of pain and what's going to be that insurmountable pain that's going to lead that. And then there's a statistical way of looking at this, where you look at, like, oh, this team's better against the pass, this team's worse against the pass, and you kind of just look at statistics. And then certainly there's a technical analysis.
So I had one, okay, before, and I know you're going to finish with the technical analysis too, and I didn't know you were going to stop right there, but I did have one more question about the Illini, because you mentioned earlier a team that is happy to be there, a team that's not happy to be there. The fact that they lost those 3 games, they feel like they got the most off-brand bowl and they're not happy to be there. Is that what you're going to say, you think?
Well, I'm just saying that, you have to do that. I haven't really done a deep dive on the Illini to know whether they're happy or not going to be happy there or not. It certainly wasn't one of the games initially on my radar to look at. But I will say as well that, the bowl games also provide some opportunities from, with betting. You can play either a side, one team or the other, or you can play the total, which is set at a certain amount for both teams totally score. And you can play the over or the under of that set total of that. And right now in the bowl games, the under is covering at a pretty amazing rate. And it's because of what you mentioned too. You mentioned the transfers, you mentioned the people that are opting out. And because you've got this new type of offense that people are running, it's just not as synchronous as it was. And also people have had time off in between playing from the regular season. So therefore they're rusty, and so you look at, in professional terms, look at Deshaun Watson. He was 700 days off of playing from when he got reinstated by the league. And he looks like he's been off 1,400 days. So you have those opportunities to look at that and analyze things from that standpoint. So there really is a way of looking at this. And quite candidly, I mean, the way I call this sports investing, because especially from the NFL standpoint, I know we're kind of jumping sports a little bit, but from an NFL standpoint, I think this is important. They're required to give out injury updates. And so you have that, college is still hides that. It's a big business, and hopefully the college will soon adapt that because I think that adds more transparency and more legitimacy to what we're doing. But also, I know the coaching tendencies and the GM, and I have more visibility to those people as well as the owner in professional sports than the average guy has to the CEO, the board of directors at major companies. And certainly, you can have that. So I feel like transparency is the key to this. And I think that's why I look at it from a sports investing standpoint. I think it's very important to recognize.
Yeah, Uncle Phil, I have a couple of questions. Number one, in relating sort of the investing and trading aspect that Jim and I cover every week, and then what you do in Uncle Phil's Locks, which I want to keep mentioning. First of all, I want to mention to people, we are recording on Thursday, early afternoon here. So if Phil mentions a gang, you're actually able to, because we generally release this a couple of days later, you're actually able to see if he was right or wrong. How long do you follow trends? In other words, like, you look at it from a perspective, you talked about fundamental betting. Obviously, unders have been a big deal this year. We've seen some terrible games, especially first half unders in the NFL. I mean, there have been a lot of those that have come in. How long can you look at that and say, well, this has been working? Is it a play it until, or don't fix it if it's not? What's that phrase, Jimmy? Don't fix it if it's not broke.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right?
Yeah, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. In trading, we're always like, well, the trend is your friend, right? But like, I'm trying to understand how something like that makes sense in sports betting versus investing. And then I want to touch on your fundamental versus technical. But first, that question: how long can you follow a trend like that? It's just hit or miss?
Well, no, I think it stands true. I mean, the same Russ that's going to be here this year, and the same portal transfer until the NCAA, until we have an NCAA czar, until we have a commissioner, which we should have. Right now everything is kind of complete the way it is. But as long as the market, in your language, the market hates uncertainty, right? And
Right.
so, and that's the same thing in this market as well. We hate uncertainty. And as long as we have this collective chaos where portal transfers are going to be that, you can still maintain that edge. And as long as all these bowls, and a lot of them meaningless, are still out there, then you still have an edge of who wants to be there and who doesn't, as long as you do your research and there's significant enough time off. The same thing happens in football. You mentioned the unders in NFL, and certainly that was the case through about the first 8 weeks. And
Right.
that was important because in the collective bargaining agreement with the NFL, you understood that teams, the starters really don't play anymore in the preseason. And so that puts a big hurt, especially on the offensive lines. And the offensive lines are like a very well choreographed ballet. And so because of that, it takes them a while to trust the person next to them and to actually get all the schemes together to do that. And it took them about 8 games. And so because of that, the offenses were certainly a lot less productive than they have been lately. So I think those trends are something you can count on, year after year, unless the rules change. Then you sit back and you evaluate, and then you can take new rules from that. But to your point,
if you could give me your take on this. So I don't bet every week. I obviously only started betting when it became legal, of course.
Sure.
That's a lie. But from that perspective, like, I
hate even betting legal. But anyway, go on.
You look at it from this perspective. Like, I always look at the lines every week in the NFL. Right. The NFL is what I love to watch. And I feel like the historicals in college basketball don't work, but of course they do, because guys like you and Jimmy have looked at them for years, because there's new players almost every year now. How, like, these stars, how many of them make it past their sophomore year? And you're like, well, Duke always beats Virginia, right? And you look at it and say, but it's all new players. Whereas in the NFL, at least you have some carryover. But I'm doing what Jimmy hates, where my questions take 45 minutes. When I saw something like, I'll give the Detroit-Minnesota game, for example, Okay. You're looking
Right.
at a team that had a much better record in Minnesota. I believe they were playing in Minnesota, but I don't remember at this point. And I'm going, how can the Detroit Minnesota line be so tight? Detroit has a terrible record, but they had played well over the last couple of weeks. So my thing was, I got to pound Minnesota. Now, here's what I do. Whenever I think that, I bet the opposite of what I think. I do the George Costanza. I do the opposite, where I'm like, Minnesota's going to kill them, right? They got so much better record. I'm like, well, clearly I'm wrong, because in this example, Las Vegas to me is the market. And what Jimmy and I do on a regular basis, we always say, well, there are certain things priced in to the market, and we have to figure out how much of it is priced in versus what we actually think. When I look at what's priced in, I look at the line and say, okay, Vegas is pricing in Detroit doing a lot better than I think they're going to do. So I got to bet Detroit. And that's what I did. And it came in. But from that perspective, like, how often can somebody like me who's a casual bettor, again, I only started betting when it was legal. That's a lie. How much can we look at that and say, I'm clearly wrong because Vegas disagrees with me?
Yeah, I think what you have to look at, and this is where the true investing community differs from the sports investing community. You know, and it's Vegas sets the line at what they think the public will play, right in the middle, where they can get 50% of the action on both sides. Because I mean, their money is in the VIG. You know, they don't want to get too overweight on one or the other. So for that, in your example, and I will say that Bob, I'm disappointed. I actually gave Detroit out as one of my locks and I expected you to tell that. But the reason why, you look at, for instance, look at Minnesota. Minnesota is they have a +5 point differential, mean that they've only scored 5 more points than all their opponents have scored this year. And so they are 11-0 on one-score games, which is historic in the NFL. There is not a team that's ever accomplished that. So there's been a lot of luck. And as you guys know, there's the reversion back to the mean of what you're going to do. So in that terms, Minnesota is a very highly overvalued public team. And by looking solely at the record, is not important. And it is not as important. What NFL teams do when they evaluate teams is they look at the last 4 games. The last 4 games. That's how far they go back. And that's honestly, it's how far you should go back as well. Look at the Detroit Lions. You brought up a great example. Detroit Lions, before their bye in week 5, they were averaging giving up 34 points a game. Since then, since week 5, they've given up 22 points a game. And so their defense has gotten so much better. For instance, their offense was averaging 28 points a game prior to that. Now they're averaging 26 points a game. So again, that's the reversal of why Detroit has been such a better team, to take one sole example. So again, let's look at that from that perspective.
Okay, so Phil, Minnesota, I don't want to go past them yet. I think the Minnesota is the worst. What are they? 12 and what is their record right now? Anyway, let's just say of the elite teams, they don't look as good as Buffalo or Philadelphia. They can't. I mean, Minnesota's going to collapse in the playoffs, are they not?
Well, I think so. I mean, look, the Vegas, you guys look at futures, so does Vegas. And the odds for Minnesota winning the Super Bowl are the same as Tampa Bay's. 2 diversely different records. One actually, doesn't even have a winning record. And yet they're the same odds. So again, the futures market tells you a lot about how Vegas truly views the teams.
Okay, so I grew up in the shadow of Arlington Park Racetrack. So I've been into horses since I was a little kid. This is going to be a tough one again, but none of these leagues are our sponsors. So we can say whatever the hell this is going to be about corruption, by the way. That's where I'm going. But if we were talking about trading markets, we would never speak of anything like this. But in the horse racing, we'd be there as kids. As soon as we'd see big money in a certain time frame getting close to the race, we'd be like, boom, the fix is in. That horse is the one that's going to run. The point of this question is, when you look at the different sports league, how often does it smack of corruption to you, or does it, or do you even think about that?
Well, I think you certainly do. I mean, you look at and obviously it happened in the NBA with a referee a while back, and
Right.
and the NBA will always, hold that, that'll always be the one shining example for people that could potentially be there. The college kids and point shaving, the NLL may have taken care of a lot of that because the kids are getting paid to do that now, and you see that bouncing out. But you're still,
Craig, for the people listening who don't understand what he just said, the name, image, and likeness contract just happened for the NCAA kids so they can make money. There's no longer as much of a need to make deals with the bookies. That's what. Anyway, go on, Phil. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I apologize for crossing over that.
No problem. Yeah.
Trying to expand upon that as we speak so that I don't go over anything your audience doesn't hear, but thanks for correcting me on that. I think the biggest thing that needs to happen right now is with the officials for NFL. If that's the weak point is really the officials and the officiating, and certainly some officials have higher tendencies. Some crews have higher tendencies for calling holding and others don't, or pass interference, and those certainly affect the games. And so you have to, that's part of your fundamental analysis. You have to understand who's doing that. But until you fully get officials that are full-time, you open yourself up to that potential. And I'm not disparaging that group. It's a really, really fractional small percentage that even have that point, but you do have that potential for that happening.
So let me ask you real quick, before you talk about it, explain what they are. Do you ever look at teasers, and do you ever look at parlays? And if you could explain to people what both of those are in case they don't know what we're referring to.
Yeah, parlays are simply taking two or more teams in a bet and to actually win against the spread, or you can take them on what's called the money line, which just means to win the game. They don't have to be against the spread. Again, for your audience, the spread is like, say, for instance, if Bob and I were in a trading contest, Bob would have to spot me a lot of points. So, in that regards, but the same thing happens in sports as well. So, the teams, it really has a difference in that, but also the money line, but also from a teaser standpoint, a teaser can be say, hey, I like this team to win, but I'm going to tease it that say there's 6-point teasers, 6.5-point teasers. Say, for instance, let's say for tonight's Thursday night game, Dallas is favored by 12 points. And you're like, I like Dallas, but I don't like them by 12, but I can tease them down 6 points to win by 6 points. But I have to have a corresponding teaser along with it. You can't just tease one side. You have to do a two. So you can tease it with another game this weekend, another NFL game this weekend, or you can tease it with the total that's tonight as well and tease that up or down 6 points. And you have those two, and it gives you some insurance to win. The teaser point, when you're doing it plus or minus points, it actually decreases your odd of winning. So if you bet $100 on that game, in a typical game, you bet $110 to win 100. This game, if you bet two teams together and tease them, you might win $90. But if you did a parlay and you did the $100 on a two-team parlay and don't manipulate the spread any and take it at face value, you might win $150. So that's really the monetary difference and a little bit of rudimentary difference between the two.
I got to tell you guys really quick, this is not a question, but I actually use sports betting a lot for emotional hedges. For example, every single Bears-Packers game, I take the Packers on the money line. I don't care what it is. I don't care what it is. I do. I'll put $100 on the Packers. And I'm like, look, I am happy either way because I get too aggravated. I hate them. I love Aaron Rodgers, but I hate him. I love Brett Favre, but I hate him. I hate everything about them as a Bears fan. And I will always bet the Packers every single time they play, just so that I can collect the money when the Bears lose, which is annoying.
And the day, okay, and I loved watching Aaron Rodgers play. But the day he gets his leg bent sideways, and all these announcers are always like, oh, you gotta hate to see that. No, I hate to see someone hurt their head, hurt their back. If he blows out his knee at this point in time, I don't give a shit. Does that make me an evil person? He's going to be just fine. But anyway, whatever. I don't answer that question because I want to go. You mentioned the Bears. Perhaps you've heard of them, Uncle Phil. Okay, so week 7, Bears play Monday night. They destroy the Patriots. All of a sudden, it looks like they have a top 5 team in the NFC. They start dismantling their defense the next day. They get rid of Robert Quinn. They get rid of Roquan Smith. When you look at a team like that and you realize that they are not playing for this year, I know players play to win, but coaches and ownership don't always play to win, correct?
Correct. It 100% happens. And it's certainly really evident. I think that's what makes this week and next week so interesting from a sports betting perspective, because you don't know who is like, hey, if, this team, the Bears, for instance, if they were to continue to lose out and then the Houston Texans were to pick up some meaningless wins, the Bears slide into the number 1 spot in the draft. And so that becomes really, really, really important depending upon who you want. So it's certainly interesting to do, to see players always play to win, coaches always play to win, but ownership sometimes puts their finger on the scale a little bit.
Wait, you do think you go, Bobby?
Yeah, here's one of the things I really like about Uncle Phil, Jimmy, is I've listened to his Twitter Spaces and we've communicated quite a bit over the last few months. He's not one of these guys that pretends he understands the sport because he understands the betting. Now, he does obviously understand sports on all levels. But my point is this: I was listening to a different sports podcast the other day, and I will never listen to them again. I was actually just trying to get ammunition for this particular conversation, right? And one of the things the guy does, he's like, they won't play their starters. The coach doesn't know what he's doing. It's like, hold on, stop. What Uncle Phil does well is he understands the spread and the money line versus what the team may or may not do. Jimmy played and coached basketball, okay? I played and coached football. I can be a terrible football sports bettor sometimes because I'm like, they got to run inside on this team. And they don't, because the actual coach sees something different. So I'll think they're going to run a lot in this game because that's the matchups, right? And they can do an inside trap, or they can even run off tackle on this particular team. That's going to grind the clock down. The over's going to come in. They end up scoring 40 because the coach sees something I don't see, where Uncle Phil doesn't do that. He's humble and successful, which I just wanted to point that out. Uncle Phil's locks. That's one of the reasons I wanted to have him on this podcast. Same thing with Jimmy with basketball. Jimmy might understand something about the structure of the game. The sports bettor doesn't care about that, right? He's just trying to get the bet right. And that, I just wanted to compliment you on that, Phil, because that's something I've noticed following you.
No, that's awesome. Now I want to challenge you on something. You just said a second ago, the players always play to win and coaches always coach to win. Do coaches always coach to win? Do you want to reiterate that point? Or if the Bears, if there's somebody coming out who's a beautiful first pick, a Peyton Manning, does a coach who has a contract like an Eberflus and the management doesn't care, does he really want to win?
Well, I think Eberflus always wants to win. I think it's just in your DNA. You can't sign up for that job or sign up for a play as a player and not always want to win. Now, again, you may feel a little hamstrung at times, but when you reach a certain level, you find ways to overcome, and you adapt, and obstacles aren't impasses. They're just hurdles and for you to go around. I think all coaches you have to be wired that way.
Good. And I think you're right too. Now, what can you give us right now? When you look at the NFL playoffs, who do you think is the most likely winner coming out of it?
Look, it's completely against tradition because the Super Bowl loser typically doesn't make the playoffs. But I really love the Bengals. I think the Bengals are just a really solid team. I don't think they get enough love. They're not as flashy, but I know the people on my Twitter Spaces, they just absolutely hate that I talk about Cincinnati's defensive coordinator, Lou Anarumo, so much. But what he does in shutting teams down the second half, and he has certainly got Cincinnati is Kansas City's kryptonite. The Chiefs are certainly a major team. Buffalo doesn't have the running game. When you look at January, teams that run the ball and teams that stop the run are really important. You can almost look historically, look at the top 5 teams that run the ball and stop the run. And almost historically, there are obviously exceptions, but almost historically, those are teams that make the playoffs, and those are teams that are most successful. And Cincinnati does both.
So you think Joe's the man, right? And the reason I ask this too is because I'm starting to think Joe Burrow's the man. And there was a game a couple of weeks ago where it was a key play on the last drive. There's about a 30-yard throw, and you could just look at his face. He's saying to himself, yeah, there's about a 1-foot window, but the ball's only this big. This is nothing for me. And he zips it in. I can't remember what throw that was, but he's the man, right? This guy is the real deal, in your opinion?
Yeah, he's legit. Joe Burrow, barring injury, something, unforeseen in his personal life, whatever happens. But barring that, Joe Burrow is a Hall of Famer. Joe Burrow, you can watch him and during those critical key plays. I mean, if you look at if it's 3rd and 8, I don't know of any other quarterback I'd want to be throwing the ball other than Joe Burrow. And Joe Burrow.
Yeah. The throw I was talking about, you could feel it. It was like wild. He was like, "Oh shit, I got that. That's nothing to me."
Completely. It's almost as if his heartbeat slows down in those critical moments. So I'm with you, Bob. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So no, it's okay. I think I heard something there, and I wanted to reiterate it. So you're a defense wins championships guy, because most people are talking about Burrow and Jamar Chase, and you brought up the defensive coordinator, which I thought, again, compliment to you on taking sort of a different approach than your average bettor who's like, oh, Burrow and Jamar Chase, they're going to kill him. And you're like, nah, it's the defensive coordinator. Am I right on that?
I think it's always for me a good place to start. When I look at a game, I look at, obviously, there's obviously special teams too, but I really just look at offense, defense on both teams, and I go, which unit do I trust on that? Which unit is going to dictate the game? And that's my fundamental approach of what I do off that. But absolutely, I think most people are enamored with the offense. They're like, hey, don't look at this, look at the shiny object. And most people look at the shiny object instead of looking what's right in their face. And that's really the defense. And a lot of times the defense does dictate, what the offense is going to do or not going to be able to do. So you're right, Bob. I do start with the defense.
So I'd be remiss, because we have a mutual friend who put us in contact, whose name I'll leave out for some reasons that you and I both understand. How do you feel about the Buffalo damn Bills?
I love the Bills, but
he's going to get upset with that, but
I know he's not going to like that. I will say this, that hopefully the Bills Mafia won't come down me too hard, because I know they will, but I think they see this as well, is that Sean McDermott is a defensive coach, and it's really a shame for Josh Allen. They don't have the offensive line, and therefore, because not having the offensive line, they don't have the running game. And Josh Allen essentially is the running game.
He is the running game, right?
And because of that, it makes them really, really one-dimensional, and is going to be their downfall in the playoffs. And it puts too much burden upon them. And also, coaching matters. Brian Daboll going to the Giants, it matters. Ken Dorsey replacing him was supposed to be the next big up-and-comer, and he probably is from a play-calling standpoint. But you see the impact of Brian Daboll had with Josh Allen, where Josh Allen was this great quarterback last year, and he's still great. He has this 6'6", 260, so he's unbelievable measurables, and had this howitzer for an arm. And so you have all that, but he needs other pieces around him, and coaching matters. Look at Mac Jones with the New England Patriots, and Bill Belichick. People look at Bill Belichick and Nick Saban as the two greatest coaches in NFL and college in the history of the game that we're getting to watch right now. But the difference is, to me, Nick Saban has evolved. Look at that. He realizes that they're both defensive guys, but he realizes his weakness, and he needs to get offensive play callers. So he's had Bill O'Brien, he's had Steve Sarkisian, he's had Lane Kiffin and numerous others as his offensive coordinators, and he's built that in, and it still made Alabama relevant, where Bill Belichick has instead gone the other way and had pulled the horns in and has gone all defensive coaches with Matt Patricia and Joe Judge. And you can see Mac Jones was #1 in a lot of statistical categories for quarterbacks last year, was a Pro Bowl. And this year looks like a completely different guy. So coaching matters too. So you have to have all the elements there together.
So you just said coaching matters 3 times. I'm going to flip back to college for a second. We talked about the month of inactivity that's before these bowl games and how some of these teams come in rusty. I assume you mean particularly in off-brand bowl games. If you come in rusty to play in the playoffs, you're a bad coach. But then my question is this, is that do you look at the quality of the coach to try to determine how much rust will be on that team? And who are some coaches that pop in your head as guys that get people ready? And why is it Brett Bielema?
Well, look, Brett Bielema has had kind of a little bit of an up and down career, and I'm glad to see him doing well again. And it seems like he's found the home that he needs, and that works well for him. And it seems like a good match for him. Brett Bielema is, certainly when focused, is an outstanding coach. So coaches can be great coaches, and but it's hard to take historical, you saw, Bobby Bowden kind of at the end wasn't the same Bobby Bowden as he was 10 years before. And you have to pay attention to that. You can't say, oh, I just always bet on that. It's almost like medicine where you can't really use always and never, because it never 100%. And the same thing with this as well. And you start looking for chinks in the armor. But for me, I look for offensive driven coaches for those creativity. The teams that it's tough without looking at a specific team, but you do see kind of like, for instance, like I trust, I didn't always trust Kirby Smart in college, but it seems like when he won his national championship last year, there was less finger biting or nail biting on the sidelines, and now he's calmed down, and you can almost see the transition to a dynasty with them, because he's got the Saban bloodlines. He's a defensive head coach, but yet he has recognized the need for the offense, and you can certainly see that shifting. So there are certain coaches, the experience matters, especially when it comes to college football playoffs that we're talking about, the games that really, really, really matter. Those are important.
So we're going, again, this is Thursday afternoon for everybody. It's Thursday. What is this? The 29th, I think.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, December 29th. So coming up, what do you like? And I want to point out Uncle Phil's Locks. You follow him on Twitter. You can get some stuff off of there, but you do sell your picks, and it's extremely reasonable, by the way. You have a for sale sports betting service. So I think this is a good opportunity for you to put some really close picks that people won't see until it's over already on the record, so they can kind of judge you on that. I'm putting you on the spot here. And then anything you like longer term, which obviously understanding that things can change with injuries and lines changing and things like that. So what do you like specifically?
Sure. This weekend for the games, I think that I think Georgia and Ohio State will put up some points. And so for me, I'd probably more apt to play the total in that game for the two teams to go over the total. And on the Michigan TCU game, see, the way I look at teams and break down, obviously, Jimmy, you're a big Big Ten fan, right?
Mm-hmm.
The Big Ten has been good at the top, but at the bottom, not as good. And so I think that does a disservice to Michigan and Ohio State, who really didn't play anybody out of conference, and just very, very poor out of conference scheduling. And because of that, it doesn't prepare you well for these bigger games. It's a little bit of a shock at first to do that. So even though, that being said, I'd probably say and I think that's going to hurt them in the bowl games, in the playoffs specifically. And I think that I would take TCU against spread with Michigan. And I would also, but but both those teams play very similar. They don't play very well in the first half. So I would look at taking the under the total in the first half. But both those two teams play very well. And at halftime, you can make second half bets. And I'd look at the halftime of playing over the total in the second half with those games, because you just feel like that both those two teams seem to do a good job of regrouping at halftime and really put a lot more offensive firepower in the second half.
So you mentioned the Big Ten, and I'm Big Ten through and through, but I do believe they're overrated, particularly in the last few years. At the beginning of the show, we opened it up talking about teams that traded a premium. Does the Big Ten trade a premium in the betting world, particularly in basketball? In the last 2 years, they've just been demolished in the NCAA tournament.
I think so. I think.
Do you think they're an overrated league in general?
Well, I think that they can be. There's so much. There's so many alumni. And that's what makes Notre Dame. That, and obviously for religious reasons that Notre Dame's a little bit different. But from a Big Ten perspective, there's so much enrollment into those schools. So therefore, so much alumni, and it's just an incredible, much more wealthier area. And so the bets that are coming in on the Big Ten certainly influence the market as far as that. So number of people and amount of money influence that. And I don't think the Big Ten per se is an overrated conference in that regard. I think they tend to get overvalued just because so much public money comes in on those teams. Now this year, like I said, I think Michigan, Ohio State are, those are always top 10, top 5 recruiting teams in the nation. So the talent's certainly there. Whether or not I believe in Ron Day as a head coach at Ohio State's a different story. I'm not sure that he's there, but certainly think Harbaugh's a great coach. I think that that you look at that, but from a Big Ten perspective, just from a public betting standpoint, just from the sheer volume of numbers and money, I think that they tend to be overrated from that perspective.
All right. So Phil, critique me on these two that I like and one that stands out to me as strange. Okay. And don't be kind. Okay.
We never are.
I know. I like South Carolina +3 over Notre Dame, basically because I fucking hate Notre Dame. Sorry, Jeff Kilberg, if you're watching. I just don't like Notre Dame in general because I hate their fans. Growing up in Chicago and not being a Domer was a nightmare, because literally they all travel to Chicago and all they do is talk about Notre Dame. Every 5 minutes they bring it up. It drives you crazy. And by the way, I love Jeff Kilberg. I hate him. I just have to say it. So I like South Carolina +3 over Notre Dame. I also like Iowa -2 over Kentucky. So those are the two I like, and you could critique me and tell me I'm nuts. And then I don't understand the where to go on the Tulane USC game. I feel like USC should be favored by a lot more, which makes me want to bet Tulane. So those are 3 I want to throw out at you.
But no, I think you're absolutely thinking the right thing. I'm already on South Carolina.
Awesome.
Plus the points versus Notre Dame. Totally agree with you. Another public bet. Kentucky I don't think people realize how good Will Levis is as a quarterback with Kentucky. A lot of GMs think he could actually go number 1 because of his just size. He just hadn't had an offensive line at Kentucky, and he's been running for his life this year. But he can make all the throws. Expect him to just blow up at the combine. So without him sitting out, with him opting out, Kentucky is a far less talented team with still a bad offensive line. Iowa seems to be turning the corner. I love them in this spot. And as far as USC and Tulane, I still don't think USC's tackled anybody yet since the Utah game. So, and this is another thing, is that, does USC, who cares most about that game in the Cotton Bowl? Is it USC or is it Tulane? And do the people from Southern California really want to go to Dallas, where the weather can be a little choppy for the Cotton Bowl, where you can believe the people from Tulane, just one state over, are going to roll out to the Cotton Bowl? So I like Tulane in that one as well. Bob,
I think Caleb Williams is the next Heisman bust. I really do.
But he's amazing in college.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think he's got all the tools. I would go against you on that one. That's the
All
only
right,
way.
fair enough.
Yeah,
Fair
because
enough.
I think he's extremely talented. He and Drake May are North Carolina are the next two big things in North Carolina. Are the next two big things coming out of college and quarterback. We'll see it pan out. When I looked at last year, when I saw Caleb Williams, not this past college football season, but the one before, he looked like the next good version of Russell Wilson to me, because Russell Wilson looks a little thicker, a step slower. Whatever working was Nathaniel Hackett wasn't working. He needs a stronger coach, someone who can tell him how the offense is going to run, rather than Russell and his people telling Nathaniel Hackett what he's going to do and not do.
Definitely
God, I
Denver
can't-
got the bad end of that trade. Go ahead, Jimmy.
He doesn't even look athletic anymore. I can't believe I wanted to wrap this all up, and then you bring up Russell Wilson, what I want to talk about for half hour. But I do want to wrap it up. I want to say one more thing to people watching it, and this is to placate my lawyers, Stacy, Mark. Here it is. Betting on sports is for recreation and entertainment. Also, put a ball peen hammer on your desk next to you, and if you ever bet more than you're comfortable losing, just take it and hit yourself in the forehead with it, and everything will be fine. Bobby or Phil, do you have any last words before we shut it down?
My last couple of statements is this is Thursday. So anything Phil has said, if the game's already taken place by the time we release this, you can judge him. Otherwise, lines change. There's injuries. You got to follow Phil, Uncle Phil's Locks, follow him on Twitter. Find him on Instagram, find him on TikTok in order to see his updates on this thing. And lastly, I'll say, if sports betting is not legal where you're at, call me, because I probably got a guy in Chicago.
Got a guy.
That is fantastic. I love that. You know,
See, by the way, I usually sign out of every conversation like this, so you know where I stand on gambling. That's the Vegas blackjack dealer. See you guys.
Phil, thanks again, buddy.
absolutely
Thank
outstanding.
you.
Guys, thank
Yeah.
you both. Really appreciate you having me on.